Monsters. I'm Lynne Johnson, Content Director of AdMonsters. Welcome to the first episode of Google on Trial. AdMonsters unpacks week one of the DOJ's Big Tech Takedown. Each week during the DOJ versus Google showdown, AdMonsters editors Andrew Byrd, Yakira Young, and I will take you inside the courtroom, behind the scenes, and deep into the trenches of the trial. We'll be connecting the dots, delivering insight, and breaking down what this all means for ad tech, especially for publishers. Buckle up, it's going to be a wild ride. Andrew, I'm really interested in the perspective that you covered in an article we published last week. While in many of the ad tech circles that we're having conversations in, we're hearing a lot of people say, yes, Google's ad business needs to be broken up. But you heard another perspective recently, one from small businesses, that might be a bit of a problem. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, just for a little bit of context, the article was kind of just weighing the two sides of the DOJ trial. Of course, the core argument is claiming that Google owns several monopolies, and this one is focusing on the ad tech business. So on kind of one side, I got to attend the Connected Commerce Council press conference, and some small businesses were saying that Google's ad tech business was a cost-effective ad solution. Many of the small publishers and business owners argue that breaking up Google's ad business could hurt their ability to advertise and grow. For example, a small publisher who owns a recipe site, Yakira Young, said Google's ads are a vital source of revenue for a recipe website. Breaking up Google would complicate ad management for her small team. There was also Pavlo Pranek, who is a co-founder of Oprah Leather Goods, who fears higher costs and less access to Google's affordable, effective ads. And then Silo Gandhi, who is the owner of a digital marketing firm, suggests small businesses need Google's integrated tools. So it's basically Google is cost effective and it kind of streamlines some of the ad processes that they need. But on the other side of the argument, I kind of talked to Ariel Garcia, who works for Check My Ads, and they kind of say Google is kind of pandering to small businesses to kind of say that they're on their side. And they said that they argue that Google's monopoly stifles competition and transparency, especially in the ad tech space. Ariel argues that the trial could lead to structural changes in the industry. Google's monopolistic practices hurt small players by profiting from their dominant market position. As far as global impact, they could see more global regulation happening, especially from the UK's CMA for pushing more transparency, as I said. And as far as future implications and outcomes, they could reignite discussions like legislation for the America Act, which is kind of like a digital media transparency kind of legislation that I think came up in like March 2023, but kind of never went anywhere, kind of like a lot of like privacy legislation and stuff like this kind of does. But I know Ariel was kind of also covering just day to day, and we had testimony from Jay Friedman, who I know I won't touch on too much because I know Yakira and Lynne are going to kind of touch on, and you can kind of jump in there if you need to.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely great to see one of our own former keynotes testify, right? Jay Friedman, he led a great presentation at Publisher Forum New Orleans. And he also had a great testimony during this trial. So he really laid it out, and he let it be known, as we already know, negotiating with Google is damn near impossible. I mean, it's ridiculously tough because of the power they have over our industry. And he talked about how Goodway cannot get Google to budge on the rates. They're just set in stone. And he pointed out that, buyers don't treat every channel the same, even if those channels drive similar outcomes. And with that, I also want to touch on Google's defense for a second, because they claim that if publishers didn't like their offerings, that they could just simply turn to alternative platforms like social media. But of course, Friedman called BS on that without hesitation. I mean, his comparison was spot on. He compared it to choosing either the Ritz-Carlton or the Ramada Inn. So it's unrealistic,
That's wild.
It is wild, but it really helps, for context, it really helps you understand the difference and how if publishers do just turn to those alternative revenues because they don't like Google, their revenue is going to go down. So his testimony really showed how interlocked Google is with our industry, and it's going to be hard to untangle. what else interests me? Header bidding was supposed to be a way out for Google. Header bidding was supposed to be a way out of the world of Google, but it actually made things a lot worse. And, when Gannett testified about how they tried to switch to header bidding at one point as an alternative, they saw a 15 to 20% increase in CPMs. So, once again, it's an instance of publishers being stuck like a rock in a hard place when it comes to Google and their dealings.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to kind of bring home what both of you are saying. While Andrew, I do definitely see how small businesses could think that because they don't have the dev resources or the engineering resources to go another way, to maybe go with an ad server or an SSP, an ad exchange or an SSP. Like you go through Google and it does everything for you, right? It's almost like a plug and play. And, to get out of those pipes, like Yakira said, try to untangle all of that and start directing things in other ways. It's going to take, it's kind of like how people were concerned about the privacy sandbox, right? Like you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know, right? So for me, I'm just looking at how everyone is covering it everywhere you go. There's Ad Exchanger with daily updates. The Verge is in here. Marketecture, Ad Week. I really like, Andrew, you talked about Check My Ads. Ariel is doing daily updates. Marketecture, Ari from Marketecture, really digging into those daily updates. But something that really caught my attention is something we just published this morning by Adam Heimlich. He's the CEO of Chalice. And the title of the article is called Google is a Data Broker. Now, his idea is not that Google is just a tech company, but it's the world's largest data broker, right? And what does that even mean? What does he mean by this? He's arguing that Google's power isn't just about search or display ads. It's rooted in their massive trove of data and how they use it to broker ad placements, right? This isn't the kind of brokerage where Google sells data to advertisers. They're essentially building a system where they're collecting and leveraging that data for their own benefit and skewing the ad marketplace in their favor. I know one term that he used something, skimming. It's really interesting. You guys should, if you have not read AdMonsters article by Adam Heimlich, you should check it out. But Google's dominance in ad tech is not just about having more ads or better tech. It's about the data at the core of everything. Google knows everything about everybody, right? And they use it to give themselves first priority. This trial is revealing just how massive that access to manipulate auctions and crush the competition is. I think Heimlich's article highlights this with Google's acquisition of DoubleClick and AdMeld. Rather than acting as an honest broker, Google has used this buy-side data against publishers. So that kind of leverages into what you're talking about, Yakira. And you're inviting someone to the poker game, but you already know what their cards are. That's what that's like, right? Again, this is what it's called. It's called cream skimming. I couldn't remember the name of it. I was looking for this. And it's where Google is using their data to predict the conversions and place ads in front of future buyers that at a lower than market price, right? So they've had all these secret programs. The project they did with Facebook, right, to outcompete everybody else, Project Bernanke, I can never pronounce that one correctly. Then they had Project Jedi. And the DOJ is saying this allowed them to rig all the auctions, right? And this was hidden from the public. There's a lot of documentation coming out now that we did not know about, private and secret things they were running. And Andrew, to the point you were talking about, like what's happening in Europe, I think it's a global reckoning, which you and I reported on recently. There's a global reckoning happening right now. Apple and Google just got hit with massive fines in Europe. The CMA coming after the ad tech stack monopoly, right? The tech stack monopoly. And Yakira, you've spoken with James Roswell about this in depth. What is that name that he calls Apple and Google?
Gapple.
Gap. Yes, I love that name, right? So we're seeing this happen. Also, you talked about Jay Friedman's testimony. The testimony for me was Stephanie Laser, who used to be at News Corp, who's at Amazon now, and she's a top woman in tech. We know about those top women in media and ad tech. One thing she said was, let me quote, I have to read this so I can be exact. I felt like they were holding us hostage, right? So to emphasize the point that Yakira made about publishers feeling stuck, there's a lack of transparency, and they can't leave though. But they can't leave because where's the demand going to come from? Where are they going to find the demand, right? So what happens for publishers if this is all broken up, if Google gets all broken up? I don't know what you guys think about that. Like, do you think it's going to be higher costs for publishers if they go elsewhere, or higher costs if they still use Google, but Google in separate entities? I don't know. What do you guys think here?
Yeah, I can definitely see it being higher cost. I can't remember whose testimony it was, but they were talking about publishers working on some Google ad auction, and they were saying they're willing to take higher costs if they would lose dependency on Google's ad tech business. So I do think if they take away the ad tech business, Google, there will be some higher revenues for publishers in that way.
Yeah, I think the loss of revenue will be a short-term problem, but in the long term, if the industry really comes together, I mean, we already have so many intermediaries already. So if we come together as an industry and collaborate, like we always talk about, and partner, I think we can figure out a solution. It's going to take time.
Yeah, I think you're right. One of our friends, our monster friendlies, Scott Messer, kind of agrees with you, Yakira. I think he says this is a short-term thing, right? That in the long run, it's going to allow more competition in the ad service space, which is just good for innovation in ad tech, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. You guys have any more insights to share of what we learned from week one?
I do. I wanted to talk about what I like to call Google's special requests. They've been trying to dodge a lot of the heat in this trial. For instance, they tried to exclude a lay witness opinion testimony about their anti-competitive practices, but the judge denied that one. But then this ruling opened up a whole nother can of worms, because it's really interesting that Google managed to pull off a switch from a jury trial to a bench trial. And they accomplished this pretty much by paying the government off $2 million. And it's like, even with this paid off privilege, they're still trying to keep a lot of details behind closed doors. And it's just like, why? Like, we already know you dominate majority of the industry. So what's the point of being so secretive now? So
yeah, it is a little.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it is a little sticky for them to kind of use their power to change the trial when the whole trial is about them having too much power. That is kind of an interesting cognitive dissonance there.
We've seen that play out other places too. Yeah. We won't dig into that. I like Yakira's terminology, paid off privilege, right? Like, that's kind of fire. Yeah, Andrew, you have any last words about what we learned about last week?
I'm just kind of interested to see how things are played out, especially the tweet we kind of used in the wrapper when it was talking about if Google does lose, what would that mean for their business, and how maybe it's a little too big to sell, and kind of how that would mean and kind of how that would separate. So I'm kind of interested to see how that play out as the trial goes on. Yeah,
me too. So check back in next week. We will be doing this every week of the trial, giving you the recap, the wrap up, and our in-depth insights.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.